my curious cats, and welcome back to another episode of the Say Psychology podcast, the podcast for all the info on psychology's most questionable history. I'm your host, Leslie Lopez, PhD student and psychology nerd. Gosh, times are just tough in America right now, needless to say. I know I have a lot of viewers and listeners from around the globe, and honestly, that is such a privilege, but also please know that not everyone is as politically crazy and insane as it may seem. Some of us are actually sane and just tired of it all. But it is important for me to say that on this channel, it will always be fuck ICE, free Palestine, it's believe women, and it's trans rights all the way. And with that, today's episode isn't exactly the sweetest story either, but that's history for you, and we can only hope it doesn't repeat itself, right? Hope and prayers. Today, we're learning about Dr. Saul Krugman, the man who thought it a bright idea to test vaccines on children, but in literally the most inhumane way possible. So, if you're a little bit insane in the membrane like me, get cozy-tozy, and let's jump into it. Dr. Saul Krugman, born April 7th, 1911 in Bronx, New York, an Aries. I love me an Aries man, but clearly not all of them are all that great. But I digress. Krugman was born the son of Russian Jewish immigrants, lived fairly normal, okay, childhood, but to be fair, don't many of them. Graduated college in 1934 from the University of Richmond, yada yada yada. He went on to earn his medical degree at the Medical College of Virginia in 1939, yada yada yada. After he graduated from medical school, he was drafted for World War II, where he spent 4 years as a wartime flight surgeon in the United States Army Air Corps. Not long after he completed his career in the Army and returned home to New York in 1946, did he join the NYU faculty as an instructor in pediatrics. By 1960, he was a well-respected professor who rose in his career as a full-time researcher and university professor. His medical research was very profound for the time because not only was he specifically interested in working in pediatrics, but he was also interested in finding cures for a variety of diseases, including sexually transmitted diseases. Now, for much of human history, hepatitis has caused some of the deadliest outbreaks in the world. The symptoms, including fever, liver damage, and jaundice, were a combination that were still fairly new to the world of medicine at the time. Although today we know that there are multiple viruses, most notably A, B, and C, in the early to mid-1900s, researchers only knew it as one single disease. Because of its quick spread, finding a vaccine became particularly important for the U.S. during World War II, when it was recognized that a hepatitis outbreak had affected more than 50,000 American troops. We all know why, right? I'm not going to outright say it, but we all know why. Well, the disease was spreading so fast that it caught the attention of the Surgeon General, and the office was like, we can't let this keep getting out of hand, and established the Armed Forces Epidemiology Board. In came Dr. Krugman. He walked over to the Epidemiology Board with a proposition. He wanted to create a vaccine for hepatitis, and he knew that the perfect place where he could conduct his research was, wait for it, a children's hospital. He took the board over to Willowbrook State Hospital, a mental institution that housed mostly high on the spectrum autistic children. The hospital was already overcrowded and rampant with disease. Besides, it wasn't uncommon to test vaccines on children at the time, so everything was fine, right? Sadly, that last part is partially true. Researching the effects of vaccines through children for test subjects goes back a very long time. Edward Jenner, also known as the grandfather of vaccines, used an 8-year-old boy as the first ever test subject for his groundbreaking smallpox vaccine in the late 18th century. Dr. Krugman thought to himself, hey, why can't I do that too? The Willowbrook State School was a housing institution created by the state of New York in 1947 to house intellectually disabled children and young adults. Now, when I say intellectually disabled, we all know I mean autistic and high on the spectrum. Yes? Built in Staten Island to originally house 4,000 patients, the institution quickly swelled in population to over 6,000 patients by 1969. There were never enough resources, including the basic necessities like clean clothes and nice nurses. I mean, at the time, there was little to no public resources for caregivers and state schools such as Willowbrook. And that's why this was created, okay? As you would imagine, the conditions at Willowbrook were absolutely horrible. Rampant disease, child neglect, and abuse is an understatement. About 60% of its patients were not toilet trained, and many could not feed or bathe themselves. 60%, you guys. These children lived sad lives in this institution. So much so that Robert Kennedy himself described it as a snake pit after his visit in 1965. But 10 years prior to Kennedy, Dr. Saul Krugman paid himself a visit, and instead of seeing a horrible state of an institution, he saw a research lab. In 1955, Dr. Krugman was brought to Willowbrook to control and mitigate the spread of infectious diseases that were spreading like wildfire through the halls of that school. However, Krugman wasn't exactly there to prevent the spread of disease. See, he had a different idea in mind. His goal was to test his theories on possible patients, and thus the Willowbrook study was born. Dr. Krugman began by implementing medical surveys to help calculate the extent of the problem. These surveys discovered that the children at Willowbrook had a 1 in 2 chance of catching hepatitis their first year at Willowbrook. Now, I'm no math whiz, and I am very adamant in saying that elementary math is not my strongest suit, but 1 in 2 seems kind of steep if you ask me. That's 50%. That much I know. His surveys went on to show that 90% of the patients had markers of Hep A, which indicate previous infections, typically spread via fecal matter to oral contamination. Obviously, it's terrible given that 90% of the patients had Hep A markers, but given the circumstances of the vicinity, it's not entirely surprising, sadly. What is surprising, though, is that Dr. Krugman's surveys also discovered that the strain of Hep B among the patients was also present. Hep B is a sexually transmitted disease that lived in both adult and child populations in Willowbrook. Yeah. In an institution where over half of the population was not toilet trained with not enough caretakers to go around, it was unquestionable how hepatitis became such an intense and ingrained problem at Willowbrook. Given the information from the surveys, Dr. Krugman quickly came to a conclusion. Discovering a way to inoculate children against hepatitis would help not only those institutionalized, but could also reap benefits around the world. In other words, he wanted to use the conditions already established and provided at Willowbrook to help create a vaccine for hepatitis. At this point, you may be asking yourself, what the fuck? Because same. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of children, and I'm being honest when I say I do not see myself having children. However, I will be front and center when it comes to protecting the lives of children. All children. They didn't ask to be born. They didn't know what's going on in this world, and their innocence should be preserved by all means. All children, immigrant children, autistic children, poor children, all children. Of course, in my mind, I'm like, where the fuck are these parents? Well, sadly, these kids' parents were virtually nowhere to be found. Remember, this was the 1950s. Autism at the time was virtually not heard of. Many parents with autistic children were extremely overstimulated, stressed, and felt like they couldn't do it anymore. So, what would often happen is that they would send their children off to state schools, such as Willowbrook, without a care of the conditions of the life they had just given up and needed someone else to just take the child away from them. State schools were some of the only available interventions at the time, sadly. And despite Willowbrook already being overpopulated, there was a wait list to get in, believe it or not. Parents who agreed to let their children participate in Krugman's study had priority admittance. What does that tell you? Also, the thing is, on paper, everything seemed quote unquote fine. Potential patient parents were given a tour of the research facility. They were allowed to ask as many questions as they wanted and were given various forms that highlighted the purpose of the study. The parents met with a social worker and were allowed to discuss the study with their private doctors if they felt they needed an unbiased opinion. Most importantly, the parents knew they could withdraw from the study at any point in time. On surface level, this all sounds morally and ethically consent. No. Like, Krugman took every step to ensure proper consent. However, it is often failed to notate that Krugman knew he was preying on the weak and hopeless. Okay? As I mentioned, many of these parents were tired and over it when it came to caring for their autistic children. And Krugman knew this, which is why his team offered the priority admittance. Parents felt it was the only way in for their children, and they practically felt like they had no other option. So as long as the school kept the children and the child was not under the parents' care, they pretty much consented to whatever the school wanted and asked for, and that included Dr. Krugman's experiments. Also, it is important to understand that Dr. Krugman gave the parents the option to seek outside help, the option to seek an outside opinion. Whether the parents had the financial means, whether the parents had the motivation, whether the parents had the time, the energy, that's a different story. Dr. Krugman and his team of researchers all set out to run several experiments to observe the benefits of gamma globulin injections, a type of antibody containing blood plasma from those who have recovered from hepatitis into those who have not yet been infected. As any well-planned experiment, there always needs to be a good control group. Sadly, for cases like this. Some experiments exposed children to hepatitis with no administered globulin injections. Other children were injected and then exposed to the virus, and some were injected and were never exposed to the virus. All three groups carefully observed by the medical research team. For the first two groups, the ones who were exposed to the hep virus, it was done so through different methods. One way the children were exposed to the virus was by taking the feces of infected residents and combing it with chocolate milk for the participants to consume without knowing they were drinking hepatitis-infected poop chocolate milk. Are y'all hearing this? Like, is it registering? Hepatitis-infected poop chocolate milk for children. The children who were participants of the study were housed separately from the rest of the patients. I mean, at least it's the bare minimum of safety standards they could take. It was, however, unfair to the rest of the patients, believe it or not. Since the participants were under government care, they were housed in a sterile, newer facility with the round-the-clock care and attention, while the other non-participating patients continued to live in squalor. Can you imagine being the other children not chosen to participate but not knowing what was going on? Like, I don't think I'd ever be mad. I think I'd just be depressed and sad, wondering why I didn't get picked to go to the fancy and clean place. Like, what's wrong with me? Why didn't I get chosen to go to the nice, clean, pretty place? Come on, you can't win. You just can't win. Krugman was having a field day, to say the least. He saw the advancements he was making at Willowbrook and thought he might as well keep going. He later encapsulated measles and rubella studies at Willowbrook, resulting in over a 20-year residency as a medical director at Willowbrook. 20 years, you guys. That's an entire career. It wasn't until much later in his career that he began to finally receive backlash from the medical community regarding his study participants and its methods. To these claims, Krugman claimed he did not choose Willowbrook specifically because he was able to prey on vulnerable disabled children. No. He argued that his experiments helped the children at Willowbrook and defended their morality and ethics all the way to his deathbed. Literally. His argument was that HEP was already rampant at Willowbrook. Basically, anyone who was admitted to Willowbrook was bound to get it at some point. Under his lab control experiments, Dr. Krugman argued that the participants had better care and a better chance of survival than in the main hospital building. After he had deliberately infected these children with hepatitis. No shit, it's the least you could do, ? In his experiments, the participants had the opportunity to become immune to HEP without ever falling ill and facing its dangerous effects, all thanks to the vaccine he was working on at their disposal. And even if the autistic children, whom he called patient/test subjects, were not immune to hepatitis, they were under excellent care from his team of researchers, doctors, and nurses. Truly, Krugman was missing the big picture here in regards to ethics. Purposefully infecting children with hepatitis, no matter how likely it is that they will get it in the future in a non-controlled environment, puts them needlessly in harm's way nonetheless. No matter how well cared for the patients were, hepatitis is known to be a potentially fatal disease, even to this day, not to mention the 1950s. Additionally, the infection method of feces-contaminated food and drink is a deplorable method that hints at possibly worse conditions of the Willowbrook study. Nobody, no matter what they or their guardians have consented to, should be unwillingly drinking other human feces. Not just infected feces, but feces in general. My God, I cannot believe I am saying these words out loud. The violations of moral and ethical standards, even to professionals in the 1950s to 1960s, shows how bad these patients were treated. It wasn't until someone from the inside took to reporting the conditions of Willowbrook to a news reporter in 1972 that Willowbrook finally got the bad press it needed. The documentary called Willowbrook, The Last Great Disgrace, aired on ABC in 1972, showcasing the horrible abuse and neglect that innocent children and young adults were facing at the Willowbrook State School. This documentary caught the attention of lawmakers and to a class action lawsuit that was filed that same year in 1972. It was so bad, the documentary displayed how bad it was that these lawmakers rushed all within 1 year. In 1975, it was ordered that Willowbrook had 6 months to cut their patient population from 5,000 to 250. Put those numbers into perspective real quick for me, okay? As for Krugman, although his study was forcibly cut, he was still applauded for his advancements in the field of epidemiology, not just for his work on hepatitis, but also developments of measles and rubella, all under the Willowbrook roof. Until the very end, Krugman defended his choices and decisions regarding the treatment and methods used at Willowbrook State School, because of course he would. He is, in fact, an Aries. Was. Well, my curious cats, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Things have been getting pretty grim over here lately. I'll see what I can come up with for next episode. Hopefully I can bring you guys a little bit more light. Doubt it, but we'll try. But if you enjoyed today's episode, please remember to like, follow, subscribe, and comment on YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. As always, citations will be in the description if you want to check those out. Stay blessed, stay safe, and stay psyched. I love you. Bye.